everyone. It's good to have you with us tonight. It's been a beautiful day, but chilly, but nice and sunny, and it's like fall in the spring, kind of. It's warm in the sun and cool in the shade. And I'm glad to be back with all of you, and we're going to read chapter 11 tonight of The Horse and His Boy, and then I have something to share with you afterwards about unfinished paintings and how they relate to our life right now. So thank you all for joining me. Tonight is chapter 11, The Unwelcome Fellow Traveler. I'm doing it with a little Vivaldi in the background. I thought maybe it would be quite civilized at this time of the evening. If you have a glass of wine. Cheers. Glad to have you with us. So, chapter 11, The Unwelcome Fellow Traveler. When Shasta went through the gate, he found a slope of grass and a little heather running up before him to some trees. He had nothing to think about now and no plans to make. He had only to run, and that was quite enough. His limbs were shaking, a terrible stitch was beginning on his side, and the sweat that kept dropping into his eyes blinded them and made them sting. He was unsteady on his feet too, and more than once he nearly tumbled his ankle on a loose stone. The trees were thicker now than they had yet been, and in the more open spaces there was bracken. The sun had gone in without making it any cooler. It had become one of those hot, gray days where there seems to be twice as many flies as usual. Have you started seeing flies? I have. It's really irritating. A couple got in the house. Punky's been trying to catch them, but she hasn't quite done it. Shasta's face was covered with flies. He didn't even try to shake them off. He had too much else to do. Suddenly he heard a horn, not a great throbbing horn like the horns of Tashbaan, but a merry call. Tyro tu hoo. Next moment he came out into a wide glade and found himself in a crowd of people. At least it looked like a crowd to him. In reality there were about 15 or 20 of them, all gentlemen in green hunting dress, with their horses, some in the saddle and some standing by their horses' heads. In the center someone was holding the stirrup for a man to mount, and the man he was holding it for was the jolliest, fattest, apple-cheeked, twinkle-eyed king you can imagine. You know, this morning I was having breakfast outside with Nathan and Abigail, and I heard a horse, and then I heard hunting dogs. They were going off out into the field. Creates the atmosphere of what we're talking about tonight. As soon as Shasta came in sight, this king forgot all about mounting his horse. He spread his arms to Shasta, his face lit up, and he cried out in a great deep voice that seemed to come from the bottom of his chest. Coran, my son, and on foot and in rags, what? No, panted Shasta, shaking his head. Not Prince Coran. I know I'm like him, saw His Highness, and Tashbaan sent his greetings. The king was staring at Shasta with an extraordinary expression on his face. Are you King Luna? Grasped Shasta. And then, without waiting for an answer, Lord King, fly, onward, shut the gates, enemies upon you, Rabbadash and 200 horse. Have you assurance of this, boy? Asked one of the other gentlemen. My own eyes, said Shasta. I've seen them. Raced them all the way from Tashbaan. On foot, said the gentleman, raising his eyebrows a little. Horses? With the hermit, said Shasta. Question him no more, Darren, said King Loon. I see the truth in his face. We must ride for it, gentlemen. A spare horse there. A spare horse there for the boy. You can ride fast, friend. You can ride fast, friend? Sorry. For answer, Shasta put his foot in the stirrup of the horse, which had been led toward him, and a moment later he was in the saddle. He had done it 100 times with Bree in the last few weeks, and his mounting was very different now from what it had been at the first night when Bree had said that he climbed up a horse as if he were climbing a haystack. Times have changed. He was pleased to hear the Lord Darren say to the king, "The boy has a true horseman's seat, sire. I'll warrant there's no noble blood in him." "His blood, aye, that's the point," said the king, and he stared hard at Shasta again with that curious expression, almost a hungry expression in his steady gray eyes. But by now the whole party was moving off at a brisk canter. Shasta's seat was excellent, but he was sadly puzzled as to what to do with the reins, for he had never touched the reins while he was on Bree's back. But he looked very carefully out of the corner of his eyes to see what the others were doing, as some of us had done at parties when we weren't quite sure which knife or fork we were meant to use, and tried to get his fingers right. But he didn't dare to try really directing the horse. He trusted it would follow the rest. The horse was, of course, an ordinary horse, not a talking horse. But he had quick wits enough to realize that the strange boy on his back had no whip and no spurs, and was not really master of the situation. That is why Shasta soon found himself at the tail end of the procession. Even so, he was going pretty fast. There were no flies now, and the air in his face was delicious. He'd got his health back, his breath back again too, and his errand had succeeded for the first time since the arrival at Trash Bin. How long ago it seemed he was beginning to enjoy himself. How about that? He looked up to see how much nearer the mountaintops had come. To his disappointment, he could not see them at all, only a vague grayness rolling down toward them. He'd never been in mountain country before and was surprised. "It's a cloud," he said to himself, "a cloud coming down. I see. Up here in the hills, one is really in the sky. I shall see what the inside of a cloud is like. What fun!" I've often wondered, far away on his left and a little behind him, the sun was getting ready to set. They had come to a rough kind of road by now and were making very good speed, but Shasta's horse was still the last of the lot. Once or twice, when the road made a bend, there was now continuous forest on each side of it. He lost sight of the others for a second or two. Then they plunged into the fog, or else the fog rolled over them. The world became gray. Shasta had not really realized how cold and wet the inside of a cloud would be now, nor how dark. The gray turned to black with alarming speed. Someone at the head of the column winded the horn every now and then, and each time the sound came from a little further off. He couldn't see any of the others now, but of course he'd be able to as soon as he got round the next bend. But when he rounded it, he still couldn't see them. In fact, he could see nothing at all. His horse was walking now. "Get on, horse, get on," said Shasta. Then came the horn, very faint. Bree had always told him that he must keep his heels well turned out, and Shasta got the idea that something very terrible would happen if he dug his heels into the horse's side. This seemed an occasion for trying it. "Look here, horse," he said, "if you don't buck up, do you know what I'll do? I'll dig my heels into you. I really will." The horse, however, took no notice of this threat, so Shasta settled himself firmly in the saddle, ripped with his knees, clenched his teeth, and punched the horse's side with his heels as hard as he could. The only result was that the horse broke into a kind of pretense of a trot for 5 or 6 paces, then subsided into a walk again. And now it was quite dark. They seemed to have given up blowing that horn. The only sound was a steady drip, drip in the branches of the trees. "Well, I suppose even a walk will get us somewhere sometime," said Shasta to himself. "I only hope I shan't run into Rabadash and his people." He went on for what seemed a long time, always at a walking pace. he began to hate the horse, and he was also beginning to feel very hungry. Have you ever taken a horse ride and all of a sudden you realize you're hungry after you start out? You don't plan ahead. Well, he couldn't plan ahead. He didn't have anything. Presently, he came into a place where the road divided into two. He was just wondering which led to Anvert when he was startled by a noise from behind him. It was a noise of trotting horses. Rabadash, thought Shasta. He had no way of guessing which road Rabadash would take. But if I take one, said Shasta to himself, he may take the other, and if I stay at the crossroads, I'm sure to be caught. He dismounted and led his horse as quickly as he could along the right-hand road. The sound of the cavalry grew rapidly nearer, and in a minute or two Shasta realized that they were at the crossroads. He held his breath, waiting to see which way they would take. There came a low word of command, "Halt!" and a moment of horsey noises, nostrils blowing, hoofs pawing, bits being chomped, necks being patted. Then a voice spoke. "Attend, all of you," it said. "We are now within a furlong of the castle. Remember your orders. Once we are in Narnia, we should be by sunrise. As we should be by sunrise, you are to kill as little as possible. On this venture, you are to regard every drop of Narnian blood as more precious than a gallon of your own. On this venture, I say, the gods will send us a happier hour, then you must leave nothing alive between Cair Paravel and the western waste. We are not yet in Narnia. Here in Archenland, it's another thing. Excuse me. In the assault on the castle of King Luns, nothing matters but speed. Show your mettle. It must be mine within an hour, and if it is, I give it all to you. I reserve no booty for myself. Kill me every barbarian male within its walls, down to the child that was born yesterday, and everything else is yours to divide as you please. Women, the gold, the jewels, the weapons, and the wine. The man that I see hanging back will come to the gates, shall be burned alive in the name of Tash, the irresistible, the inexplorable. Forward! With a great clippity-cloppity-clop, the column began to move, and Shasta breathed again. They had taken the other road. Shasta thought they took a long time going past, for though he had been talking and thinking about 200 horse all day, he had not realized how many there really were. But at last the sound died away, and once more he was alone amid the drip of the trees. He now knew the way to Anvert, but of course he could not now go there. It would only mean running into the arms of Rabadash's troopers. What on earth am I to do, said Shasta to himself. But he remounted his horse and continued along the road he had chosen in the faint hope of finding some cottage where he might ask for shelter and a meal. He had thought, of course, of going back to Arvis and Bree and Hwin at their hermitage, but he couldn't because by now he had not the least idea of the direction. Dear, he's lost. After all, said Shasta, the road is beginning to get somewhere. But that all depends on what you mean by somewhere. The road kept on getting to somewhere in the sense that it got to more and more trees, all dark and dripping, to colder and colder air, and strange icy winds kept blowing the mist past him, though they never blew it away. If he had been used to mountain country, he would have realized that this meant he was now up very high, perhaps right at the top of the pass, but Shasta knew nothing about mountains. I have to tell you a story that happened to me a few days ago. It's just like that. I do think, said Shasta, that I must be the most unfortunate boy that ever lived in the whole wide world. Everything goes right for everyone except me. Those Narnian lords and ladies got safe away from Trashman. I was left behind. Arvis and Bree and Hwin are all as snug as anything, that old hermit, and of course I was the one who was sent on. King Lune and his people must have got safely into the castle and shut the gates long before Rabadash arrived. But I get left out. He was feeling sorry for himself. And being very tired and having nothing inside him, he felt so sorry for himself that the tears rolled down his cheeks. What put a stop to all of this was a sudden fright. Shasta discovered that someone or somebody was walking beside him. It was pitch dark and he could see nothing. And the thing or person was going so quietly that he could hardly hear any footfalls. What he could hear was breathing. Ooh, that's kind of scary, isn't it? His invisible companion seemed to breathe on a very large scale, and Shasta got the impression that it was a very large creature. And he had come to notice this breathing so gradually that he really had no idea how long it had been there. It was a terrible shock. He had no idea. It darted into his mind that he had heard long ago that there were giants in these northern counties. He bit his lip in terror, but now he really had something to cry about. Now that he had really something to cry about, he stopped crying. He just bit his lip. The thing, unless it was a person, went on beside him so very quietly that Shasta began to hope he had only imagined it. But just as he was becoming quite sure of it, there suddenly came a deep, rich sigh out of the darkness beside him. That couldn't be imagination. Anyway, he had felt the hot breath of that sigh on his chilly left hand. If the horse had been any good, or if he'd known how to get any good out of the horse, he would have risked everything on a breakaway and a wild gallop. But he knew he couldn't make the horse gallop, so he went on at a walking pace, and the unseen companion walked and breathed beside him. Ooh. At last he could bear it no longer. "Who are you?" he said, scarcely above a whisper. "The one who has waited long for you to speak," said the thing. His voice was not loud, but large and deep. Are you a giant?" asked Shasta. "You may call me a giant," said the large voice, "but I am not like the creatures you call giants." "I can't see you at all," said Shasta, after staring very hard. Then, for an even more terrible idea had come into his head, he said, almost in a scream, "You're not something dead, are you? Oh, please, please do go away. What harm have I ever done you? Oh, I am the unluckiest person in the whole world." Once more, he felt the warm breath of the thing on his hand and face. "There," it said, "it's not the breath of the ghost. Tell me your sorrows." Shasta was a little reassured by the breath, so he told how he had never known his real father or mother and had been brought up sternly by the fishermen. Then he told the story of his escape and how they were chased by lions and forced to swim for their lives and all their dangers in Tashbent. And about his night among the tombs and how the beasts howled at him at the desert. And he told about the heat and the thirst of their desert journey and how they were almost at their goal when another lion chased them and wounded Erebus. And also how long it was since he had had anything to eat. "I do not call you unfortunate," said the large voice. "Don't you think it would be bad luck to meet so many lions?" said Shasta. "There was only one lion," said the voice. "What on earth do you mean?" "I just told you there were at least two the first night, and there was only one, but he was swift of foot. How do you know?" "I was the lion." And as Shasta gaped with open mouth and said nothing, the voice continued, I was the lion who forced you to join with Erebus. I was the cat who comforted you among the houses of the dead, and I was the lion who drove the jackals from you while you slept. I was the lion who gave the horses the new strength of fear for the last mile so that you could reach King Luna in time. And I was the lion you do not remember who pushed the boat on which you lay, a child near death, so it came to shore where a man sat wakeful at midnight to receive you. Then it was you who wounded Erebus. It was I. But what for? Child, said the voice, I am telling your story, not hers. I will tell no one any story but his own. Who are you? Asked Shasta. Myself, said the voice, very deep and low, so that the whole earth shook, and again, myself, loud and clear and gay, and then the third time, myself, whispered so softly you could hardly hear it, and then it seemed to come from all round as if leaves rustled with it. Myself. Shasta was no longer afraid when the voice belonged to something that would eat him, nor was it the voice of a ghost, but a new and different sort of trembling came over him. Yet he felt good, too. The mist was turning black to gray and from gray to white. This must have begun to happen some time ago, but while he had been talking to the thing, he had not been noticing anything else. Now the whiteness around him became a shining whiteness. His eyes began to blink. Somewhere ahead he could hear birds singing. He knew the night was over at last. He could see the mane and ears and head of his horse quite easily now. A golden light fell on them from the left. He thought it was the sun. He turned and saw pacing beside him, taller than the horse, a lion. The horse did not seem to be afraid of it, or else could not see it. It was from the lion that the light came. No one ever saw anything more terrible or beautiful. Luckily, Shasta had lived all his life too far south in Colorman to hear the tales that were whispered in Tashkent about a dreadful Narnian demon that appeared in the form of a lion. And of course he knew none of the true stories about Aslan, the great lion, the son of Emperor over the sea, the king above all high kings in Narnia. But after one glance at the lion's face, he slipped out of the saddle and fell at his feet. He couldn't say anything, but then he didn't want to say anything, and he knew he shouldn't say anything. The high king above all kings stepped toward him. His mane and some strange and solemn perfume that hung about his mane was all around him. It touched his It touched his forehead with its tongue. Shasta's forehead. He lifted his face, and their eyes met. Then instantly the pale brightness of the mist and the fierce brightness of the lion rolled themselves together into a swirling glory and gathered themselves up and disappeared. He was alone with a horse on a grassy hillside under a blue sky, and there were birds singing. Thus ended the lesson. Tomorrow night we will read chapter 12, and it's Shasta and Narnia. Thank you for listening. I want to share a story. I've been on a story where I got lost and couldn't see in front of me. When I was a boy, I sang in a boys' choir. There's like a Vienna boys' choir. We do concerts in Long Beach in Southern California. And my folks always ended up being the station wagon that drove all the boys to the concert. And I remember so many times there would be a fog bank that would come in just below Whittier down toward the beach. And you could put your hand in front of, you literally could get out and put your hand in front of the windshield and you couldn't see it. And you'd just be stuck in this white out fog for hours. Anyway, that's very visually poignant for me because I remember it. So let me take one more sip here. I'm going to tell you a parable and a story which is really important for us still in quarantine, and for us to think about people that we know. Yesterday, in a wonderful devotional, it talked about meditation. It talked about paintings being incomplete. It was a quote by Vincent van Gogh. And it talked about how often artists never finish their paintings, or they leave them unfinished and go on. And the point of it was that you don't need to pressure yourself for perfection. That if you have an unfinished painting, perhaps it will create another one, or you can come back to it later. I was just with Ed Nippers, and on Sunday I'm hoping to do a broadcast and interview on his painting of Christ going down into hell, the harrowing of hell. It's the most amazing painting, and it's like the description here of Lewis with the eyes and the face of the lion. We were talking this morning, or yesterday, Nathan and Abigail came to visit me. We were talking about, well, if the virus ended tomorrow, what would it be like? Would life change? And I said, I think it would, as a matter of fact. I don't think we can ever go back to the word normal, or even the new normal is just not to be in the vocabulary. Because what we have just experienced may not be quite as severe, but it's close to my folks who were born in the early part of the century. They went through the Spanish flu, and they went through the Depression, and they survived. And I think we're having a touch of both, and it's going to change our lives forever. The other night I was really hungry for a German meal, and there's a wonderful restaurant called the German Table. And I called to see if they had takeout. They didn't answer, so I called the shop next door, and they said, oh, they've moved out. The store is for lease. So there are a lot of small businesses that do need rescuing, and I'm praying that the government will keep doing that as much as they can. But some just won't survive because they were on the edge to begin with. So this is a painting of my daughter, Rachel, when she was probably 16. It's a wonderful sketch. The artist is Marguerite Slocum Quinn, who now lives in California with her new husband. And this was done in her studio in Washington, D.C. when Rachel was 16. She's about double that now. And I found this old frame, and I've shown it to you before, but this relates to the story today about the unfinished painting. Margie is an amazing painter, but sometimes she tries too hard to finish the painting. She's very talented, but some of her best things are sketches. We were talking yesterday about how wonderful a sketch is. Just an indefinite line or something else hints at what's there. And there's a painting we have in the dining room. I've shown it to you. It's by Don Journey, and it's eucalyptus trees in the fog. And Don Journey, I said I love that because it reminded me of the fog up in Northern California where Twyla grew up, and there's a row of eucalyptus trees just before you get to the airport above Eureka. Just to put it in perspective, the airport was designed during World War II to test fog conditions. So I remember one Christmas, my mother, Esther, came to visit Twyla's mother and father and to be with their family. And we were at the airport waiting, and it was fogged in, and you could hear the planes above flying around and circling. You had to go all the way over to Redding and then take a bus. She arrived the next morning after about a 6-hour drive. But we were all glad to be together, and we were there for Christmas. Anyway, so this is a painting by Marguerite Slocum Quinn, and it's really a wonderful likeness. It's exactly the way Rachel looked when she was that age. I'm going to bring it up closer now as we finish and show you what's on the back. So Margie, I gave Margie this frame, and she decided she wanted to use a Luan board to paint on and do this sketch. It was a sketch, I believe it was a sketch that later became part of the painting with my 2 girls and Twyla and my mom's dog up in our bedroom, our guest bedroom on the top floor. I will show you the painting another day, but this is, I believe, a sketch. It may not be, but it was the beginning of that. Anyway, so I'm going to turn it around. So what she had done, she had used a palette, that she used for painting, and used it to paint this painting on. So on the back was it was a palette, and on the front was a completed painting. I think this is a lesson for life right now. No matter when this ends or what we're doing, this is how we viewed life before now. Is a complete painting. We knew what was normal, we knew where to go, we knew what day it was, we knew where to go to work, we knew where to go eat, we knew what restaurant was open. Hi Punky, you're hungry, I can see. We always would try to find, we knew exactly, life was predictable. But that's no longer the case. Life will never be predictable again for a very long time. Not only because of businesses shutting, but people who have passed away, and people who've gotten sick, and the caregivers, and the nurses, and the patients, and those who will be doing testing. So I just want you to remember this. This is the way life was before a few weeks ago. This is the way it is now. And it's really, you know, an unfinished painting is not a disaster. An unfinished painting is a wonderful challenge and an adventure. It either spurs you on to a new painting, or to fill in the lines of the one that you already thought you had. But in any case, it will never be the same as the completed painting. And a lot of things that we cherish, like our church buildings and our homes and all these things, they all seem like a finished painting. We want to preserve them. But when we're forced to be inside and be away from them, we end up having to create something new in them and through them. Like my friend Ed Nippers, he said, I finally got a book out of my library that, these were all books that someday I was going to read. He said, today is the someday. So today is the someday. Tonight is the some night that you should think about doing something you haven't done that you would like to do. And especially call someone who's in need and alone. Thank you for joining me. It's lovely to be with you, and we will see you at 3 tomorrow for tea, and continue talking about the Little Lame Prince and his traveling cloak. And I hope by tomorrow or the next day I will have an actual traveling cloak that I can show you. So good night, God bless, and you can find me on Facebook Live, Glenfeather Hall, or you can find me also on YouTube. There's some that haven't quite been posted yet, but they will all be posted on YouTube, and you can watch them anytime you want. So have a wonderful night. God bless. Love you all. Thanks.